Under the scorching sun of the Persian summer, the story of Mithridates begins not in the boats that would one day seal his fate, but in the pride that would doom him. He had been a soldier under Artaxerxes II, a man hardened by the endless campaigns and political turbulence of the Achaemenid Empire. In the great civil war against Cyrus the Younger, Mithridates played a small but decisive role. He claimed that during the chaos of the battle at Cunaxa, it was his spear that struck the blow ending Cyrus's life. In a court that lived on whispers and flattery, such a boast might have elevated another man. But in the court of Artaxerxes II, this was no harmless pride, it was a direct theft of the king's glory. According to the accounts that survive, including that of the historian Plutarch, Artaxerxes believed it was his own strike, his own divine right, that ended his brother's rebellion. Mithridates' claim was an insult, a dangerous act of self-promotion that placed him directly in the path of the king's wrath. And wrath, in the Achaemenid court, could be as cruel as it was calculated. Scaphism was not a punishment handed down for petty theft or drunken mischief. It was reserved for those whose offenses were considered almost cosmic in scale: treachery, sacrilege, or, as in Mithridates' case, the theft of royal honor. The method itself was more than execution, it was theater. It was designed to be remembered, to sear itself into the collective mind of the empire as a warning. The sentence was delivered not in shouts or rage, but in the smooth, measured voice of the king's appointed official. The court knew what it meant. The guards knew. Mithridates himself likely knew the moment the words were spoken. The order was clear. He was to be subjected to the boats. To long, narrow wooden vessels were brought out flat-bottomed, hollowed just enough to allow a man's body to fit snugly inside. One boat for his back, another for his front, with holes cut for the head, hands, and feet to protrude. They were not built for travel, they were built for containment. Mithridates was stripped naked, his skin already glistening under the heat. The executioners laid him down into the lower half, the rough wood pressing into his back. Then, like a lid on a coffin, the second half was placed over him and sealed, leaving only those small openings. He could still breathe, he could still see, but he could not move, and he could not escape. Then came the milk and honey. It was not given out of mercy or kindness, but as a deliberate part of the torment. The executioners forced the thick, warm liquid down his throat, well beyond his ability to swallow comfortably. He gagged and choked, the milk coating his mouth and beard. They smeared more of it across his face, his arms, his feet, any patch of exposed flesh. The sticky sweetness clung to him, a lure for the true executioners of this sentence, the insects that haunted the marshes and rivers of Persia. The boats were carried to a stagnant, sunlit patch of water, some say a reedy pond, others an open stretch along a slow-moving river. There, the soldiers shoved the craft out into the shallows and anchored it in place. The smell began to rise almost immediately. Insects swarmed the air, drawn by the scent of sugar and sweat. Flies landed first, their delicate legs brushing against his skin, tasting him, probing for soft spots. Mosquitoes hovered and darted, piercing with their slender proboscises. Ants, crawling from the shore, found his toes and fingertips. The torment had begun. In the first hours, Mithridates struggled violently, his muscles straining against the confinement of the wooden shell. His shouts echoed over the water, carrying toward the bank where guards watched impassively. But the boats were unforgiving. Every attempt to move only scraped his skin raw against the planks. The milk in his stomach soured under the heat, and nausea set in. He vomited, the smell mixing with the sweet honey to create an even more potent lure for the creatures gathering in buzzing clouds above him. By nightfall, the first stage of Scaphism was well underway. The insects no longer just landed and flew away, they began to bite, to burrow, to feed. Flies laid eggs in the soft tissue at the corners of his eyes and mouth. Mosquitoes left raised welts along his cheeks and neck. Ants found their way into his ears. The shallow water kept him warm and damp, preventing any relief from the assault. Sleep was impossible. The darkness was filled with the constant hum of wings and the sharp, stinging pinpricks of new bites. Day after day, the ritual was repeated. The executioners would return, not to end his suffering, but to prolong it. They fed him more milk and honey, ensuring that waste would accumulate beneath his body, trapped inside the boats, mixing with the water, fermenting into a rank sludge that drew even more vermin. His skin became a living landscape for parasites, maggots hatching and crawling in open sores, beetles gnawing at tender flesh. He could no longer tell if the wetness on his skin was sweat, blood, or the fluids of rotting tissue. The sun blazed without pity, baking the wood around him until it burned to the touch. His lips cracked and bled, the honey turning to a crust that glued them together until his tongue forced them apart again. His voice grew hoarse, his pleas reduced to a rasp, his body trembling with fever. By the accounts we have, Mithridates survived far longer than most would have thought possible. 17 days, Plutarch tells us, the insects feeding, the rot spreading, the man slowly unraveling into something less than human but still conscious enough to feel it all. By the second week, Mithridates was unrecognizable from the proud soldier who had once stood in the court of Artaxerxes II. His face was swollen, his skin a patchwork of festering sores and blackened necrosis. The boats that confined him were now a prison of stench and decay, coated inside with the residue of waste, pus, and clotted blood. The water below had turned into a pulsing, writhing layer of insect larvae, climbing through the openings to join the feast. His mind drifted in and out of consciousness, not because of mercy from the body, but because of the fever that raged within him. Every breath was shallow, every movement a stab of agony. Yet somehow, against all odds, he clung to life long enough for the cruelty to continue. The guards, who had grown accustomed to the sight, stopped flinching at the horror. Their duty was to keep him alive for as long as possible. They kept feeding him the same milk and honey, shoving it into his mouth until he gagged, forcing his stomach to bloat again. His body was no longer just a victim, it had become a living banquet for thousands of insects, each bite tearing away another shred of his humanity. By the 17th day, the process reached its inevitable end. Mithridates' voice had vanished entirely, his eyes glazed over but still faintly aware. The insects had stripped much of the soft tissue, and what remained of his skin was mottled with infection. The marsh water lapped gently against the boats, indifferent to the suffering it had witnessed. At last, his body gave out, releasing him from the torment that had been prolonged to the very limits of human endurance. The soldiers dismantled the boats, pulling apart the halves to reveal what little remained intact. The execution was complete not merely as a punishment, but as a message carved into the collective memory of the empire: defy the king, and your death will be a spectacle for the ages. The tale of Mithridates and the Persian method of Scaphism has haunted historians for centuries. Some debate its historical accuracy, suspecting that Plutarch may have embellished the details for dramatic effect. But whether exaggerated or entirely true, the story serves its purpose: to make us confront the darkest capabilities of human cruelty. It's the kind of execution that was designed not just to kill, but to erase dignity, to turn a human life into a drawn-out theater of humiliation. And in that sense, it has succeeded for over 2,000 years because even now, we remember it. If this story made your skin crawl, you're exactly the kind of person who belongs here in Torture's Room. This is where we dig deep into the worst humanity has ever invented, punishment so cruel, so bizarre, that they feel like nightmares but are painfully real. Every week, we uncover another forgotten tale of torment, peeling back the layers of history to expose the dark, raw truth. So, if you want more stories like this, tales that stick in your mind long after you've heard them, be sure you hit subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss what's next, and join us as we walk the shadowed path through the most twisted corners of history. Because here in Torture's Room, the past is far more terrifying than fiction.